Before we proceed too much further in our discussion of multiple form projects, there are some other factors that you want to consider. In previous movies we've discussed creating variables in projects that have only had one form. Now that we're discussing multiple forms, we want to consider other factors such as the scope, access level, and lifetime, and namespaces of variables in multiple form projects. We'll take a look at each of these in this movie. The scope can be defined as a set of statements that can access a variable without qualifying its name. For example, if I have a statement that says total text box equals summary form dot total decimal, the scope of the variable total decimal will require that I reference the name of the form, in this case summary form, and another form. That is, this statement would appear in a form other than the summary form. Otherwise, I would not be able to reference total decimal unless I specified which form it belonged to. So the scope will require you to include the name of the form, and remember, you will not be able to use me because me references the currently active form, and since you have multiple forms now, that may not be the correct form. So qualifying its name refers to the fact that you have to specify the name of the form followed by a dot and then the name of the object. Access level will specify the condition that's required to make use of the variables. The private declaration statement makes variables available only to the form where declared. The public or friend statements makes variables available to other forms within the project. By default, variables are private. You will want to use caution when using public or friend, since this will leave the possibility open that your variables may be accessed by the user at times when you wish them not to be available, that is, in other forms. The lifetime of a variable is the period of time that a variable remains active and available within the project. Local variables exist only as long as that procedure is executing, and you should use local variables as much as possible. Module level variables exist for the entire duration of the project, and there are times when the module level variables are indeed necessary. Namespaces are automatically assigned by Visual Studio and defaults to the name of the project. This namespace can be modified in the Project Designer window. And just some general suggestions for variables in multiple form projects. You should always try to keep the scope of the variables as narrow as possible. This simply keeps you in control as the programmer and lessens the possibility of the user from inadvertently accessing variables or data that you don't want them to access. When you have to use a variable in more than one location, you should consider passing arguments from one local variable to another to keep the scope as narrow as possible. And finally, if a variable is truly needed in more than one form, you should declare it as a friend variable rather than public. But declaring as friend, you are limiting its use, but you are making it available to that particular module. Making it public makes it available to the entire project, which is always risky. So you always want to try to solve your application using local variables as much as possible, and then proceeding from there and using a wider scope of variable only as needed.